Prohibited content. The past, when it insists on returning, has consequences for everyone. We're proposing a deal, Andrade said. Training, a pay raise, and access to certain documents you're interested in. In exchange, you leave the historical archives where they are, untouched. Translation, I said. Shut up and get rich. Translation, Andrade corrected with a slow smile. Grow up and move on. I watched them, feeling like I was sitting on a volcano. Marco wouldn't look at me. He was fidgeting with a pen, restless. Laura Aparicio's hands were still, too still. Andrade radiated the false positivity of a weekend life coach. I'll think about it, I lied. We need an answer today, Aparicio said. Before 6. My fingers tightened into fists beneath the table. The stranger's voice from the phone call came rushing back. Regional Library, 6 o'clock. I nodded slowly and stood up. So today? I replied. I'll email you. I left the office with a mixture of adrenaline and disgust. Emiliano was waiting in the hallway, as if he hadn't been able to move from that spot the entire time. What did they want? He asked. To buy me, I said, and tie me up with a pretty bow. Don't take it, he whispered. I don't trust Aparicio. I've seen her before with people who don't end up well. Since when do you pay so much attention? I asked, and I couldn't tell if it sounded like an accusation or relief. Since I saw you bite your lip when you got that email, he confessed, looking down. My feelings for you aren't just a coincidence. A thick silence fell between us. My head felt like a cage, and he stood there with that clumsy sincerity that always disarmed me a little. I sidestepped the comment. I have to leave early, I said. Cover for me if anyone asks. Of course. By 5:10, I was in the elevator. My reflection in the mirror was of someone older than the person I'd been that morning. I went down to the street, took the metro towards Pacifico, and then walked under an overcast sky to the regional library. Inside, the scent of old paper and dust greeted me like an awkward hug. The periodical room was nearly empty. A student asleep on his notes, a librarian arranging spines, and a man in a gray suit at a table in the back. Thank you for coming, he said without getting up. I'm Villanova. The name shot through me. You signed my mother's letter of recommendation. And I also signed her termination papers, he replied, his voice weary. I thought I was protecting her. I was wrong. I sat down slowly, feeling the pulse in my temples. Protecting her from what? Villanova opened a cardboard folder and slid a stack of clippings, memos, and 2-color photographs toward me. In one, my mother stood in front of a screen displaying a flowchart. In the other, she was seen from behind talking to a Laura Aparicio who was 20 years younger. From them, he said, and from something we used to call the parallel projects. What you now call the S legacy isn't an archive, it's a wound. I opened my mouth to ask a question, but just then my phone vibrated on the table. A message from a blocked number. You've been followed. Don't turn around. I froze, the phone in my hand. Villanova watched me in silence as if he could read my thoughts. I didn't dare look up. I pretended to review another document while my heart began to hammer against my ribs. Is something wrong? He asked, not moving a muscle. No, I lied. Please, continue. But the words echoed in my mind. You've been followed, don't turn around. The back of my neck prickled with heat, as if someone were standing right behind me, breathing very slowly. Villanova leaned forward, lowering his voice. I know what that message says. Listen to me. You have to act natural. Get up. Walk to the shelf with the newspapers from 2003 and take out the third volume from the left. There's something inside you need to see. I gave him a skeptical look. And what's in there? Proof that your mother wasn't fired for a mistake she made, but because she discovered who was stealing information to sell to competitors. I swallowed hard. I stood up slowly, feigning indifference, and walked towards the shelf. With every step through the aisles, I felt I was being watched. I opened the indicated volume, which was quite dusty, and there, tucked between the pages, was an unmarked brown envelope. I slipped it into my bag without opening it. When I returned to the table, Villanova was gone. In his place was a handwritten note. If you want more answers, don't come to the office tomorrow. I'll call you. Great, I muttered to myself. But as I turned to leave, I saw him, Emiliano, standing by the door of the periodical room, his expression a mix of concern and something harder to decipher. Guilt, maybe? What are you doing here? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. I followed you, he admitted, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I didn't trust what you might do on your own. You followed me? I repeated, my voice louder this time, feeling it crack. It's not what you think. Oh no? I took a step toward him. Because what I think is that every time I trust you, you prove you're no different from the rest of them. He ran a hand through his hair and looked down. I didn't come to watch you. I came because Andrade called me an hour ago. He said he wouldn't leave you alone, that it could be dangerous. And you believed him? Yes, because I've seen how he acts when someone gets in his way. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe him. Another part wanted to get as far away as possible. We left the library together. Outside, the afternoon was already fading, and the streetlights were beginning to flicker on. We walked in silence until we reached Atocha station. There I stopped. I'm going alone from here, I said. I'm going alone. He stared at me for a few seconds before nodding and disappearing into the crowd. I felt a momentary relief, but also a bitter loneliness. On the metro, I opened the envelope. Inside were printed copies of emails. Some of the senders were familiar. L. A. Villanova, Andrade. Others were unknown. Among them was one dated 2 weeks before my mother was fired. The parallel project is ready. SS has been asking too many questions. Proceed as agreed. Confirm by Friday. SS. My mother. The train car suddenly felt too small. I glanced around and there he was. A man in a dark suit sitting 3 seats away, watching me without any attempt to hide it. When our eyes met, he smiled in a way that froze my blood. I got off at my stop, almost running. I didn't look back until I was inside my building's entrance. The man was gone, or at least I couldn't see him. I went up to my apartment and double-locked the door. I turned on the living room lamp and spread the documents on the table. I leaned over them, trying to make sense of it all. But before I could connect any of the dots, the doorbell rang. I crept to the peephole. No one. It rang again, more insistent this time, and then a white envelope slid under the door. I bent down to pick it up. Inside was a single typewritten sheet. Your mother wasn't the only one. Tomorrow you'll find out who else. And at the bottom, an address. It wasn't the office, it was Graciella's home. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the sofa, the white envelope open on the table, reading Graciella's address over and over, as if staring at it long enough would make it disintegrate. Outside, Madrid was silent, broken only by the distant hum of cars on the M30. Every creak of the building made me whip my head toward the door. By 8 in the morning I was dressed, but not for the office. A black sweater, jeans, sneakers, nothing that would draw attention. The folded note was in the inside pocket of my jacket. I decided not to tell Emiliano. I didn't want him following me or having an excuse to report back to Andrade. I took a bus to the Salamanca neighborhood and got off at a corner where I could watch Graciela's building. It had an elegant facade with old moldings and a golden intercom that gleamed in the morning sun. I waited, pretending to scroll through my phone. At 9:15 exactly, Graciela emerged, impeccable as always in a beige coat and sunglasses. She walked quickly but not toward the office. She turned in the opposite direction toward a street of small shops and old-fashioned cafes. I followed at a distance, careful not to get too close. She stopped in front of a discreet door with a barely visible sign, Marqués de Herrera Cultural Foundation. She rang the bell, waited and went inside. I crossed the street and saw through the glass that she was greeting someone, a tall woman with her hair pulled back, wearing a light gray suit. I didn't recognize her at first, but when she turned her head, I knew who it was, Laura Aparicio. I pressed myself against the wall, the adrenaline coursing through me. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see their gestures. Graciela spoke with her hands, Laura nodded and then handed her a blue folder. I waited for 15 minutes, and when they came out, I pretended to look at a nearby bookstore's window display. Graciela left in a taxi. Laura walked off toward the Retiro Park. I approached the foundation's door. It was slightly ajar. I slipped inside, and the smell of old paper and waxed wood hit me. No one was at the reception desk. I walked down a carpeted hallway to a small room with bookshelves and a central table. There on the linen tablecloth was another blue folder identical to the one Laura had given Graciela. I glanced both ways, took a deep breath, and opened it. Inside were reports on company letterhead, titles, Project Segovia, External Contracts 2003, Sensitive Personnel. On that last list I recognized 3 names, my mother's, a man named Javier Ramiz, and my own. "I knew you'd come," a voice said from behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the folder. Laura Aparicio stood in the doorway, a humorless smile on her face. "I see curiosity runs in the family," she added. "What is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is what will destroy you if you decide to play against us." "Us? Who are you talking about?" "The people who have kept this company standing for decades, and the people who know how to get rid of anyone who gets in the way. Like my mother." Laura took a step closer. "Your mother was brilliant but naive. She thought she could expose what she saw. She didn't understand that sometimes what looks like corruption is simply survival." "Survival for whom?" I demanded. "For all of us who are on the inside." I stared at her. "Well, I don't plan on surviving like that." She laughed softly as if it were all a game. "Then I suppose you won't live to see the end of it." She turned and walked out of the room. I was paralyzed for a moment, but as soon as the echo of her heels faded, I shoved 2 of the reports into my bag and slipped out the foundation's back door. As I walked toward the bus stop, I felt someone watching me. I glanced sideways and saw him, the same man in the dark suit from the metro a few yards away, matching my pace. I reached the intersection and quickened my pace. So did he. I darted across against the red light, dodging cars. He did the same. I turned down a side street and ducked into a random open doorway. I ran up 2 flights of stairs and peeked out the stairwell window. He was there, standing on the sidewalk, looking up. Then he pulled out his phone and raised it to his ear. I didn't wait to see more. I ran down another set of stairs that led to an inner courtyard, crossed to the parallel street, and ran until I was sure I'd lost him. When I got home, still trembling, I opened one of the reports I'd stolen. On the first page, a list of secret payments, and Emiliano's name. The doorbell rang suddenly. This time it wasn't an envelope. It was him, Emiliano. His face was pale, his hands empty. "We need to talk," he said. I opened the door but left the security chain on. Emiliano stood there with that mix of urgency and regret on his face. The gray light from the building's hallway made him look even more tired than usual. "What do you want?" I asked, not bothering to hide my distrust. "Let me in, it's not safe to talk out here." I stared at him for a few more seconds, weighing whether it was a trap. Finally, I closed the door, unhooked the chain, and let him pass. He stood in the middle of the living room, not sitting, his hands shoved in his pockets. "You're in trouble," he said. "You don't say," I replied, crossing my arms. "And I suppose you're here to—" "What, save me?" "I'm here to tell you something I can't put in writing or say over the phone." He took a small step closer. The smell of rain on his clothes reminded me that the sky outside was still heavy with clouds. "I worked for Andrade before I started at this office," he began. "Not in an office, but on what he calls discrete tasks." "Discrete tasks? Like following me?" I interrupted. "Like gathering information, monitoring movements, yes, sometimes following people, and before you say it, yes, I followed you at the beginning too." I turned my back to him so he wouldn't see the anger rising in me. "And you're telling me this now, after all these months? Because now you're the one who's in over her head, and it's not your fault. Right, the poor victim," I scoffed, turning back to face him. "Well, I just found your name on a secret payment report, and surprise, it's right next to Graciella's and Aparicio's." Emiliano blinked, genuinely surprised. "Seriously? Don't pretend, Emiliano." He ran his hands over his face in frustration. "I swear I have no idea why my name would be on there. Yes, they paid me, but for specific jobs. Andrade is the type to write down every single cent in multiple ledgers, and not always for the same purposes." I walked over, the blue folder in my hand. "Then explain this." I tossed the report at him. He caught it, scanned the page, and his brow furrowed. "This isn't the original," he said. "It's been rewritten to frame whoever they want. They do it all the time to manipulate potential witnesses, or to wash their hands of you before everything blows up." He fell silent. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Look," he said finally, "I know you don't trust me. I don't blame you. But Andrade and Aparicio are planning something big, and you've become a problem because you've started digging where you shouldn't." "I'm digging for the truth, and around here that's like asking to be wiped off the map." I watched him for a few seconds, trying to read the sincerity or the strategy behind his words. There was exhaustion, yes, and fear, but something else too. A need for redemption that I wasn't sure I could take seriously. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Tonight at 10, there's a meeting in a safe house Andrade uses. I'm going to slip in. I need you to come with me. There are documents there that could explain what happened to your mother." "And why should I believe you?" "Because if you don't, Graciela will bury you before you can even react." I said nothing. The silence was filled by the tapping of rain against the window panes. "Fine," I said at last. "But if you double-cross me, there won't be a place in Madrid you can hide." He nodded as if accepting the condition without reservation. He left my apartment without another word. I locked the door and went back to the table where the other report I'd stolen from the foundation was still open. This time I noticed a detail I had overlooked before. A Swiss bank account number linked to a payment that coincided with the exact date my mother was fired. My phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "If you go with him tonight, you won't be coming home." I stood there, the screen glowing in my hand, the echo of the threat hanging in the air. And then, a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. "I know you're in there." a woman's voice from the other side. It was Graciela. I stood frozen in front of the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Graciela's voice resonated with an artificial calm that only made me more nervous. I didn't open it right away. "I'm not leaving until we talk," she added, her tone firm, without a trace of impatience. I clenched my teeth, slipped the phone with the threatening message into my pocket, and against my better judgment I opened the door. Graciela was impeccable, as always. A beige coat, a silk scarf, her hair perfectly coiffed. In her hand, she held a small bag from an expensive bakery. "We can talk inside," she said, stepping past me without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door behind her and followed her into the living room. She placed the bag on the table and sat down, crossing her legs. "What do you want?" I asked. "To save you some trouble," she replied with a soft smile, "and to save your family some trouble." I laughed in disbelief. "My family? I already know what you did to my mother." "You don't know everything," she corrected me, tilting her head. "Sonia got involved in something she didn't fully understand. Andrade tried to help her, but let's just say she wasn't willing to negotiate." "Help her? Like you're trying to help me, right? Pairing me up with Emiliano for coffee, having me followed, leaving me anonymous messages." Her smile widened, but her eyes remained cold. "Not everything that happens to you comes from us. There are other players in this game, and not all of them have your well-being as a priority. And you do? My priority is making sure you don't become a problem for everyone. If you accept Andrade's proposal, you protect yourself, and you protect your mother's memory." I leaned forward. "And if I don't, then your name will show up on papers you don't want published. Papers linking you to money transfers that, coincidentally, passed through accounts opened in your name years ago." I froze. "That's a lie." "It doesn't matter if it is or not," she replied with a shrug. "It matters what it looks like. And believe me, people will believe whatever is convenient." I opened my mouth to answer, but she stood up. "Think about it. You have until tonight to decide. After that, there's nothing I can do for you." She headed for the door, but before leaving, she turned. "And be careful with Emiliano. He doesn't always play for the same team." I watched her disappear down the hall. I closed the door and stared at the knob for a few seconds, trying to process it all. Fear and rage mixed like poison in my blood. I went straight to my purse and took out my phone. I opened the anonymous message and read it again. "If you go with him tonight, you won't be coming home." The him was Emiliano. And now, Graciela had just sown more doubt about his loyalties. I sank onto the sofa, taking a deep breath, trying to come up with a plan. I had two options: go to the meeting with Emiliano and risk it being a trap, or follow him without his knowledge and find out if he was really working for Andrade. Or for someone else. It was 8:30 when I decided the second option was the only one that would ever let me sleep again. I grabbed my jacket, my bag with the stolen documents, and left. The air outside was damp and cold. I walked to the corner and waited. At 9:10, I saw Emiliano leave his building. He had a black backpack slung over his shoulder and was walking fast. I kept a safe distance, following him through several streets until he reached an old building in Lavapiés. He didn't go through the main entrance. He slipped into a side alley and disappeared behind an unmarked metal door. I approached slowly and heard voices. I recognized Andrade's, and to my surprise, Laura Aparicio's, and then, a moment later, Emiliano's. "She's getting too suspicious," he was saying. A pause. Then Andrade. "Then the problem ends tonight." My heart started beating so hard I was afraid they could hear it from inside. I backed away from the alley with quick steps, trying not to draw attention. As I rounded the corner, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. A gruff voice answered. "I need a favor," I said, "and it's not a small one." "Tell me where and when," the voice replied. "Now, and come prepared." I hung up. I looked back toward the alley and swore to myself that whatever happened tonight, I wouldn't be the one running away again. The sky over Madrid was so black it seemed to absorb the city lights. I was walking quickly toward Lavapiés, my hands shoved in my pockets, my mind racing. My contact, that number I hadn't dialed in years, had responded in less than 15 minutes. It was Javier Ramiz, an old friend of my mother's, a former private investigator, and, from what I'd last heard, a man with more enemies than friends. If anyone knew how to move in the shadows, it was him. I found him on the agreed corner, leaning against a lamppost, wearing a leather jacket that had seen better days and carrying a briefcase he never went anywhere without. "Well, well," he said with a lopsided grin, "if it isn't Sonia's daughter." "No time for pleasantries," I cut in. "Andrade and his people are in a meeting right now, planning to get rid of me." "And you want proof?" "Exactly. And if possible, I don't want them walking out of there so easily." Javier looked at me with an expression that mixed pride and concern. "You've got more of your mother in you than I thought." We walked together through the narrow streets to the alley I had seen earlier. I pressed myself against the wall while Javier opened his briefcase and took out a small device with headphones. He connected it to a directional microphone and aimed it at the metal door. The voices came through clearly. "We can't wait any longer," Andrade was saying. "Je te suis. She's too close to everything." "I can take care of it," Emiliano replied. His voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. It hurt to hear him. Javier shot me a look as if asking if I wanted to keep listening. I nodded. "No, not you," Laura Aparicio intervened. "If you do it, it'll be too obvious. Let it be an accident." A dense silence. Then Andrade. "Fine. Tomorrow morning, then." Javier turned off the device. "Sounds like you're out of time." "I am," I answered, rage burning in my throat. "But so are they." "What do you have in mind?" I pulled the blue folder with the stolen documents from my bag. "If I can get this to the right people before they act, I don't just save myself, I sink them." Javier smiled. "I like your style." He laid out a quick plan. We would enter the building from the roof. He would plant a couple of bugs, and I would record everything I could with my phone. With the evidence in hand, we would leave the same way we came in. Easy to say, harder to do. We climbed the fire escape of an adjacent building, jumped to the rooftop, and crossed over until we found the maintenance entrance for the space where they were meeting. Javier picked the lock in seconds. We went down a dark corridor until we were above the room. Through a ventilation grate, I saw Andrade sitting at the head of the table. Graciela was on his right, Laura on his left. Emiliano was standing, leaning against the wall, his gaze lowered. "What about Ramiz?" Graciela asked suddenly. My blood ran cold. "He's disappeared," Andrade said, "and it's better if he stays that way." Javier tapped my shoulder and pointed to the active recorder. We already had something. I turned to go back, but just then a voice echoed behind us. "Looking for something?" I spun around. Emiliano was in the hallway, just a few feet away, the access door closed behind him. There was no surprise on his face, only an unsettling calm. "I told you not to come," he said, looking me in the eye. "Now I can't protect you." "Protect me?" I shot back, unable to stop a bitter laugh. "Is that what you call it?" Javier took a step forward, placing himself between us. "Either you step aside or we finish this conversation outside, kid." Emiliano ignored him, his eyes still on me. "Not everything is what it seems, but if you don't listen to me now, You won't get another chance. The voices from inside the room were getting closer. Someone was standing up. Javier looked at me urgently. Decide. Do we leave now, or do you hear him out? And in that instant we heard the metallic click of a gun's hammer being cocked from the hallway behind us. The sound of the hammer being cocked cut through the air like a scalpel. I turned slowly, and there she was. Laura Aparicio, pointing a black pistol at us that looked too heavy for her delicate hands. Her face, however, showed neither effort nor doubt. "Lower your hands," she ordered, her voice firm, almost bored. Javier calmly raised his palms, but I didn't move a muscle. I could feel the adrenaline urging me to do something, anything. Emiliano, however, took a step toward Laura. "This isn't necessary," he said, his tone strange, almost pleading. "Shut up, Emiliano," she cut him off. "You're not going to fix this one." "I don't want to fix it," he replied. "I want her to get out of here alive." Laura narrowed her eyes, sizing him up. "Do you really think that's up to you?" In that moment, Javier shifted his weight. It wasn't a sudden move, just a slight adjustment, but it was enough to make Laura's gaze flicker for a second. Emiliano seized the opportunity and lunged at her. The gun went off. The blast echoed off the walls, but the shot went into the ceiling. Javier slammed her against the wall and disarmed her. "Run!" he yelled, tossing me the pistol. But I didn't run. Instead, I threw open the door to the meeting room and walked in. The sudden entrance made everyone inside turn. Andrade, Graciela, a man I didn't recognize, and a couple of new faces who looked like bodyguards. "What the hell?" Andrade started. I took out my phone and placed it on the table, hitting record. "Shall we continue?" I said. "What you were saying before about accidents and side projects. I want to get it all on the record." Graciela stood up, a venomous smile on her face. "You have no idea what you're doing, little girl." "I have a better idea than you think," I replied. "And I have proof." Andrade let out a short, harsh laugh. "Proof is only worth something if the person presenting it is still alive to show it." "Well, that's too bad for you," I said, gesturing with the pistol still in my hand. "Because I don't plan on disappearing today." Just then, Javier and Emiliano came in behind me. Javier had Laura by the arm, her wrists bound with a plastic zip tie. "You know what the funny part is?" Javier said, looking at Andrade. "All of this is already in the cloud, sent to 3 different addresses if anything happens to her. All your secrets are on the front page tomorrow." The silence was immediate. Andrade clenched his jaw but said nothing. Graciela, however, turned to him. "Tell me this is a joke." "It's not," I intervened, "and I'm going to make sure every one of you gets what you deserve." I walked to the table and pushed the blue folder toward the center. "There's enough in here to sink your careers, your savings, and your reputations. And it's not just in my hands anymore." Andrade looked at me with an unsettling calm. "Everything has a price, doesn't it?" "Yes," I replied. "And yours has just come due." Javier gave me a nod and we backed out of the room, leaving the 4 of them with the weight of what they had just heard. As I closed the door, I felt for the first time in days that I was in control, even if just for a moment. Outside, a light rain greeted us like a curtain falling after an intense scene. Emiliano walked beside me in silence. Finally, he spoke. "What I said before about protecting you, it wasn't a lie, but I understand now. You don't want protection, you want justice." "I want more than that," I replied. "I want them to burn for every day they have left to live." Emiliano nodded, his gaze fixed on the pavement. A ghost of a smile touched Javier's lips. Suddenly, my phone vibrated. An unknown number. I answered. "You have enemies, but you also have admirers," a man's voice said. You've started something you won't be able to stop, and not everyone who will fall was in that room." "Who is this?" I asked. "Someone who was also betrayed by Sonia." The line went dead. I stared at the screen, a chilling realization washing over me. I had just opened a door far larger than I had ever imagined. I barely slept that night. It wasn't fear. It was the cold euphoria coursing through me as I thought about what was coming. For days I had been reacting, surviving their moves. But now, at last, it was my turn. I rose before dawn and put on a pot of coffee. As the machine sputtered to life, I opened my laptop and reviewed all the documents Javier and I had uploaded to the cloud. There was more than just evidence against Andrade and Graciela. There were trails of payments to third parties, fictitious contracts, and transactions that implicated several people on the outside. People who, perhaps, had nothing to do with my mother but were cogs in the same corrupt machine. I decided that exposing them all at once wasn't enough. I wanted them to crumble piece by piece. I wanted each of them to feel the ground give way beneath their feet, never knowing where the blow came from. The first step was Graciela. Her entire life was built on her perfect image, her charity event connections, and her friendships among Madrid's high society. All it took was sending a forged bank statement, based on real data, from an anonymous account to a couple of financial journalists. In less than 48 hours, her pristine reputation began to crack under whispers of tax evasion. The second step was Marco. He had always been Graciela's talking shadow, her sycophant, and he knew far too much about her role in the layoffs of the early 2000s. Thanks to Javier, I got my hands on a video from a private meeting where Marco accepted a bribe in exchange for leaking internal information. The video went viral on social media. In less than a day, Human Resources had placed him on temporary suspension. Andrade, meanwhile, seemed immune. He continued to show up at the office as if nothing had happened, wearing that same smug smile. That is, until I began sending copies of the fake contracts directly to his international partners. Some cut ties immediately. Others started asking uncomfortable questions. The man who had always controlled the narrative was beginning to lose his grip on it. And then there was Laura Aparicio. She was different, cold, calculating, less vulnerable to social pressure. I played a different game with her, an envelope containing photos of her meeting with direct competitors of our clients, accompanied by a simple message. This is only the first page. Nothing more was needed. The next day, she called in sick on medical leave. Through it all, Emiliano was still there. I couldn't tell if it was out of loyalty, guilt, or fear that I would drag him down with the rest. One afternoon, as we were reviewing documents, he looked at me and said, "I don't know if what you're doing is justice or revenge." "It's memory," I replied, "and memory hurts." Javier, sitting across the table, offered one of his tired smiles. Sometimes they're the same thing. The circle was closing. With every person that fell, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. But there was one last move left, the riskiest of all. To bring to light the real reason my mother had been fired. Not a rumor, not a veiled accusation, but the whole unvarnished truth. It was in an encrypted file stored on a server Javier had located but had been unable to crack. If we could decrypt it, we would have the final piece to bring Andrade down with no chance of recovery. That night, as Javier worked on breaking the encryption, I received a text, blocked number. It said only, "Don't open that box. Sonia didn't die in an accident." The air left my lungs. My mother? Murdered. I looked at Javier, his fingers still flying across the keyboard, then at Emiliano, who was watching me in silence. I said nothing, but deep inside me, something shifted. This was no longer just revenge for an unjust firing. This was about the truth, all of it. And I knew the final chapter of this story would leave everyone, including Emiliano and me, in a place from which there was no return. Javier broke the encryption at dawn. I was sitting across from him, my hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee, when the folder opened on the screen. Inside were emails, meeting minutes, and one confidential report on company letterhead, dated the exact week my mother was fired. The document described a discovery. Sonia had uncovered a hidden system for transferring data to foreign servers. The information being sold included strategic government projects and the personal data of high-profile clients. The final paragraph, signed by Laura Aparicio and approved by Andrade, read, "Contingency protocol will be implemented. The Sonia case will be closed before she can file a formal complaint." The phrase "close the case" burned in my mind. It wasn't a dismissal. It was a sentence. "This is it," Javier murmured. "This destroys them all." I didn't answer. I was drowning in an unbearable mix of rage and grief. Emiliano, who had been standing by the window, turned to me. "If you release this, it's not just them who will fall. Others who may have had nothing to do with it will go down too. If I stay silent, history repeats itself," I said, my gaze locked on his. We spent the day preparing the leak. Javier contacted 3 investigative journalists. "I've also scheduled automatic sends," he said. "So if anything happens to me, the file gets released anyway." By 8 o'clock that night, the material was in the hands of the press. The reaction was immediate. Within hours, national news outlets were leading with headlines about the most serious corporate espionage ring in the last decade. The faces of Andrade, Graciela, Marco, and Aparicio were on every front page. Their fates were sealed quickly. Andrade was arrested the next day, charged with corruption, fraud, and industrial espionage. His smug smile vanished the moment the handcuffs clicked shut in front of the cameras. Graciela was stripped of all her honorary titles. Her friends erased her from event guest lists and board meetings. The last time I saw her, she was sitting alone on an empty terrace, smoking with trembling hands. Marco took a deal with the prosecutor in exchange for testifying against Andrade. It was a humiliating fall from a cocksure flatterer to a desperate informant. Laura Aparicio simply vanished. She never appeared for court summonses or was seen in public again. Rumor has it she fled the country under a false identity. Javier Ramos recovered a piece of his lost reputation, though he knew his world was still a dangerous one. He told me he was leaving Madrid after this. Emiliano was the only one left in a gray area. His name appeared in the documents, but also on recordings where he tried to stop them. The press painted him as a key witness, though I still didn't know if he'd done it for me or to clear his own conscience. And me? I didn't escape unscathed. The company fired me, not that I cared. For weeks, journalists camped outside my door begging for interviews I never gave. My goal was not to become a public hero, it was to close the circle. A month later, I returned to the cafe where it all began. I ordered 2 coffees out of habit and sat at the table by the window. When the waiter brought the tray, I smiled to myself. I didn't need anyone to help me carry it anymore. I looked through the glass and thought of my mother. "It's over, Mom," I whispered. "They can't hurt you anymore." As I lifted the cup to my lips, my phone vibrated. A message from a blocked number. "Not everyone on the list has fallen, and some of them are watching you." I looked up. Across the street, amidst the flow of pedestrians, I saw a man in a dark suit, the same man who had followed me on the subway. He smiled, then disappeared into the crowd. I knew in that instant that my war wasn't over. It had only changed fronts.